Same glyph. Third ruin this month.
What does it say?
They only pretend to sleep.
My name is Milo Reyes, and my job title, printed on a laminated card I keep losing, is Habitat Systems Technician, Tier 3. What that actually means is I fix things that beep at 3 in the morning. On the day the galaxy quietly decided my species was a war crime waiting to happen, I was elbow deep in a coolant filter, wondering if the vending unit on Deck 4 would ever restock the orange soda, or if that was just a cruel rumor started by the last tech who had my job before he transferred out. Aegis Reach isn't much to look at, a joint research station bolted together by the Calyx Dominion, orbiting a dead rock called Cassandra Vale that used to have people on it 40,000 years ago, and now just has ruins, dust, and a team that gets very excited about pottery shards. Earth got a seat on the station because the Dominion needed a control species for a long-term behavioral study, and we were cheap, plentiful, and didn't ask questions. I got the job because I answered a listing that just said, must enjoy small spaces and irregular pay. I met Iyeth Sorne on my second week in the observation lounge, staring at a data slate like it had personally insulted her ancestors. Iyeth was Vastral, like most of the Dominion crew, tall, teal-gray skin, a fine ridge running from her brow to the back of her skull, big dark eyes that always looked like they were doing math. She was the dig site's lead archivist, which meant she spent her days translating dead languages and, that particular afternoon, looking like she'd translated something she wished she hadn't. "You're the human," she said, not looking up. "Last I checked," I said, sitting down across from her with my lunch, which was a protein bar and my own crushing sense of financial regret. "Everything okay?"
"We found another one," she said.
"Same glyph. Third ruin this month." I asked what glyph. She turned the slate around. It was a carving, worn smooth by time, showing a shape curled in on itself, eyes closed, and underneath it, in a language the translation software rendered in shaky, uncertain script, "They only pretend to sleep." "Neat," I said, because I did not know what else to say, and went back to my protein bar. I want to be clear that at no point did anyone explain to me that this was a big deal. Overseer Prael Doskin, who ran the station with the warmth of an airlock, made the call early on to keep the control group, meaning me, uninformed. Scientific integrity, he called it. I called it nobody tells the janitor anything, which, to be fair, is also just how every job I've ever had has worked. So while the archivists spiraled quietly into an academic panic, I kept doing my job. I fixed the coolant filter. I rewired a busted airlock sensor with a paperclip and a prayer because the replacement part was 6 weeks out and the door kept sticking on a hull breach warning. I got the mess hall's noodle dispenser working again by hitting it exactly once, in exactly the right spot, a technique I call percussive diplomacy. None of this felt remarkable. It felt like Tuesday. It felt like something else entirely to Iyeth, who I later learned had started keeping a private log, cross-referencing my behavior against the recovered warning texts. Calm under pressure. Resourceful, with minimal resources. Unbothered by personal risk. Prone to humor during crisis.
I did not know this log existed.
If I had, I would have told her that unbothered by personal risk was doing a lot of heavy lifting for, doesn't have the budget for proper safety gear. The entries got longer as the weeks went on. One note, which I only saw much later, simply read, subject hummed while rewiring a hull sensor during a decompression alert. Query, is this bravery, stupidity, or a species-wide inability to distinguish the two? I could have told her the answer was mostly the third one, with a light seasoning of the second, and that the humming was only because the sensor panel's access chime was stuck on a single flat note that had been driving me quietly insane for a week. The warnings, it turned out, weren't unique to Cassandra Vale. Every extinct civilization anyone had dug up in this stretch of space, 3 empires, 1 confirmed genocide, and 1 species that had apparently just packed up and left the galaxy, had left some version of the same message, in wildly different languages, thousands of years apart. They only pretend to sleep. Do not mistake stillness for peace. When they wake fully, there will be no negotiation. Iyeth's working theory, which she did not share with me, was that this warning referred to some ancient predator species, long vanished, maybe extinct, maybe just very good at hiding. Prael's working theory was that it was superstition, the kind every dying culture invents to explain its own collapse. Neither of them, as far as I can tell, seriously considered that the warning might be about the guy who fixed their noodle dispenser. In their defense, I hadn't considered it either. The trouble started 9 days later, when the dig team cracked open what they'd been calling the vault, a sealed chamber at the ruin's core that their scanners had been too polite to look inside of until then. Inside was a machine. Not pottery, not bones. A machine, dormant, humming faintly, wrapped around a crystalline core that lit up the second sunlight touched it for the first time in 40,000 years. I found out about the machine the same way I found out about most things on that station, which is that alarms started going off while I was holding a wrench. The lights went amber, then red. Doors that were supposed to be open sealed themselves. Somewhere below decks, something that was definitely not supposed to move started moving, and Prael's voice came over the comm sounding, for the first time since I'd met him, less like an overseer and more like a person. Guardian construct active. Life support diverting. All personnel to containment stations. Here's the part where, if this were one of Iyeth's translated legends, the humans would do something suitably terrifying. Burn the sky, break the moon, whatever old stories say we do. What actually happened is that I was the only person on deck 4 when the construct's containment field started drawing power straight from the coolant loop I'd fixed that morning, which meant the reactor was about to overheat in a way that would end everyone's day permanently. I did not have a heroic plan. I had a wrench, 45 seconds, and a coolant valve I already knew intimately because I'd been elbow deep in it that same morning. So I did what I always do when a system I've already fixed once starts failing again. I hit the exact same spot, in the exact same way, and rerouted the flow manually, the way you jiggle a stuck car window, except the car window was load-bearing for the station's life support. It worked. The reactor stabilized. The alarms went from panicked red to merely annoyed amber. And the ancient Guardian construct, whatever intelligence still rattled around inside its 40,000-year-old core, apparently registered that its containment breach had just been calmly, casually, undramatically solved by a guy in coveralls who was now checking his watch because his shift was supposed to end 10 minutes ago. It went dormant again. On its own. Nobody has fully explained why, though Iyeth has a theory, and it is, in her words, deeply upsetting. I found out what the theory was 3 days later, when Prael finally, reluctantly, called me into a briefing room instead of just talking over my head like usual. Iyeth was there, looking like she hadn't slept, which for a species with 3 eyelids apparently takes some doing. She showed me the translated warning again, the full version this time, the part they'd left out of the earlier summaries. They do not rage. They do not panic. They repair what is broken and move on, and that is how you will know them, and that is why every empire that has met them fully is no longer here to warn you twice. We believe, Iyeth said carefully, that the construct was built to test exactly this. Not strength, not weapons. Whether a species could face catastrophic failure without escalating. Every prior civilization triggered the Guardian and responded with panic, aggression, or evacuation. You responded by fixing a valve. I responded by fixing the same valve, I said. I was already annoyed at it. That may be the most concerning sentence I have heard in my career, Prael said. I would like to report that I took this revelation with appropriate gravity. I did not. I asked whether this meant hazard pay, since I had technically prevented a station-wide catastrophe, and my contract's hazard clause was frustratingly vague on ancient alien test machines. Prael stared at me for a long moment, the way you stare at a bomb that has decided, of its own accord, to be a toaster instead. They gave me the hazard pay. They also quietly rewrote station protocol, so any future ancient constructs, artifacts, or ominous humming crystals would be handled exclusively by human contractors, on the unspoken theory that we were historically bad at knowing when to be afraid of something, and that this was apparently the scariest trait in the known galaxy. Iyeth updated her research paper. The original title had been something suitably academic about pre-collapse warning glyphs across the sector's dead civilizations. The revised draft, which I found on her slate and was absolutely not supposed to read, was called confirmed. They're still awake. They're just doing maintenance. I still don't entirely understand what the big deal is. Every civilization that ever met us apparently left a note warning the next one, and as far as I can tell, the note just says we're calm, we're handy with a wrench, and we don't scare easy. That doesn't sound like a threat. That sounds like a guy you'd want around when the coolant filter clogs. But I suppose if you're an empire that collapsed because you panicked at the first sign of trouble, watching someone casually uncollapse your ancient death machine with a socket wrench and a bad attitude about unpaid overtime probably does look like the end of the world. Prael, for what it's worth, has started scheduling me for every dig site the Dominion opens within 3 systems. Official reason unlisted. Iyeth still stops by the lounge sometimes, slate in hand, asking careful, roundabout questions about my childhood, my hobbies, whether I've ever been afraid of anything at all. I usually tell her about the time I was cornered by a goose back on Earth because it's true, and because the look on her face when she writes it down like evidence is worth every bit of the confusion it causes. Anyway, the vending machine on Deck 4 is still out of orange soda. If any Ancient Guardian constructs are reading this, I will trade you stabilizing your core for a case of the stuff. I hear I'm apparently very good at fixing things nobody else wants to touch.